Hello, everybody. I hope your week is off to a good start. I have posted an announcement talking about what is due for this week. You guys have two assignments, one being a presidential debate logical fallacy assignment. This week we're going to be talking about persuasive speaking, and within that we're going to talk about logical fallacies, and that's going to be a lot of what we focus on for this week. So the first assignment, I have provided you two links. Okay, you are to open up each one of these links. One is to the one of the Democratic presidential debates. The other one is from 2020. The other is to the Republican presidential debates from 2016. Now, these are rather long videos. You are not expected to watch these all the way through by any means. What I want you to do is simply pick, kind of fiddling around here, pick 20 minutes of each one of them, okay? Ideally not the beginning. It takes about 5 minutes until they actually start talking about the issues and things like that. So pick 20 minutes of each video, right, roughly, and then I want you to pick out two logical fallacies in each one of those videos, right? Explain to me what the person said and why they're guilty of the logical fallacy that you've identified. Okay? So two different fallacies for each video. The other assignment is Journal 4. Okay, this will be under the Journal tab on Talon. Okay. The presidential debate logical fallacy assignment, that will be under Chapter 12. Journal 4 will be under the Journal tab. So there's instructions on that one. It's rather simple, right? It's very similar to what we've done for the first three journals. In this case, we're just applying logical fallacies to our real lives. So again, take a look at that, the directions for that, and make sure you get both of those completed by Friday. Okay. All right. So talking about persuasive speaking. This is a really cool chapter. I get really excited about this chapter because it applies to so much more than just simply your persuasive speeches. It teaches you how to formulate a logically sound argument and how to identify when someone else is forming an argument that has logical flaws. The first thing I want to go over is what is persuasion. Persuasion is a communication process involving both verbal and nonverbal messages that attempts to reinforce or change listeners' attitudes, beliefs, values, or behaviors. Right? So you're trying to change the way someone thinks or acts. Okay? I think it's important to note that persuasion happens over time. Earlier in the semester, we talked about the pendulum effect, right? And how people exist on a continuum. Try to pull them all the way from here, all the way over to the other side, they go back farther the other way. Okay. So, the way to persuade someone is in little tiny increments. So, persuasion happens over time. You're not simply going to speak to somebody on an issue, have them think one way, and totally flip-flop their mind, right, in 5 minutes. Right? It just doesn't happen. We talked earlier briefly in the semester about impression management. So the longer somebody believes something, the more difficult it is to change their mind. So if you are able to change somebody's mind just quickly in 5 minutes, pulling from one side to the other, it's likely that they haven't believed that belief for a long time. Okay? So if I think that Madeline, right, is a very good student, right, and she comes in the first day and I have this thought of her, right, I think she's a really good student. And then she comes in the second day and is very disruptive, rude, disengaged, right? Constantly distracting other students. I might flip-flop that belief and be like, man, maybe Madison isn't a very good student. Right? But if she's come to class every day, right, for 8 weeks, every day, she's there at class, she's engaged, she's professional, she's asking good questions, right? And then all of a sudden, one time she comes in and she's disruptive, right, disengaged, not paying attention. I'm likely not going to change my belief of Madison. So the longer I believe something, the harder it is to change that opinion. Right? Now, if Madison suddenly starts acting totally the opposite of how she has all semester, what I'm probably going to say is, wow, something must be going on in her life. Maybe it's a time for me to pull her aside and see what's going on. Right? So, persuasion happens over time. Right? With people who believe something for a long time, it's very, very difficult to get them to change their views. Okay? And that's when the pendulum effect starts to happen. The 4 goals of persuasion. You should be seeking to accomplish at least one of these in your persuasive speeches. 4 goals of persuasion are adoption, discontinuance, deterrence, and continuance. Adoption is where you ask the listeners to demonstrate their acceptance of an attitude, belief, or value through affirmative changed behavior. Okay, again, intelligent people take complex things and they make them simple, right? So how do we make this simple? Okay, adoption is simply asking somebody to begin doing something. Okay, affirmative change behavior, you're asking someone to start doing something. So if I am persuading the audience to eat healthy, right? I want them to be more healthy, I want them to eat healthy. Adoption might look like me asking them to start eating vegetables, or start eating fruits, start eating lean proteins, right? That's adoption. I'm asking them to start doing something. Discontinuance asks the listeners to demonstrate their acceptance of an attitude, belief, or value by stopping a certain behavior. So, for the same topic, right, I want my audience to eat healthier. Discontinuance might look like me asking them to stop eating at McDonald's. Right? I'm asking them to stop a certain behavior, stop doing something that's unhealthy. Right? Stop eating Big Macs, stop eating fries, stop eating fried foods in general. Okay? That would be discontinuance. Deterrence asks the audience to avoid beginning a certain behavior. Right? So if my audience doesn't eat at McDonald's already, right, I might say, hey, don't start eating at McDonald's, right? It's rather unhealthy food. A very prevalent example that I can think of in our country, I don't know how many of you remember the don't start smoking ads is basically what they were. And they would have people on there who were smokers. And I remember one lady in particular, she had throat cancer and had some sort of surgery, and she now had to push a button in her trachea in order to talk, and she kind of sounded like a robot. Right? And her message was simple. Don't start smoking, right? Don't begin doing it, right? And her message was, I started, and then I got addicted, and I couldn't stop, right? So don't start smoking, right? That's deterrence, right? You don't want the audience to begin doing a certain thing. And then the last one is continuance. This asks the audience to continue a certain behavior or exhibit the behavior more than they already do. So, going back to the eating healthier topic, right? This might look like me asking the audience to eat more vegetables than they already do, or eat more fruit than they already do, or more lean protein than they already do, because they're already eating a little bit, right? But I just want them to do it more than they already do. So again, your speech should ask the audience, right? One of these 4 things, at least one of these 4 things, should be your goal for your persuasive speech. We talked a little bit about choosing a topic when it came to our informative speeches. I gave you a little bit of advice. I told you to choose something that you know about, and choose something that you are passionate about. Because when you're passionate, something comes through, right? People see that. They're more engaged, right? You're excited about the topic, and people are drawn in by that. 2 more things to add on when it comes to choosing a topic for your persuasive speeches. You must choose something that is not factual. Okay? You're trying to change somebody's opinion on something. So, in order to change someone's opinion on something, there must be more than one way of thinking. So, don't get up here and talk about how you're going to persuade the audience that gravity exists. 99.999% of the population believes and knows that gravity exists, so there's really not two sides to the argument. So choose something that has more than one side of the argument and is not factual. Aristotle's three means of persuasion: ethos, pathos, and logos. You've likely heard of these at some point, maybe in an English class, maybe when you were in high school at some point you heard of ethos, pathos, and logos. Okay. So, ethos simply refers to the speaker's credibility, pathos refers to an emotional appeal, and logos refers to a logical appeal. So since ethos speaks to the speaker's credibility, how do you develop credibility? Three ways: competence, character, and charisma. Charisma is something that it's kind of an abstract concept. Right? A quality about someone that makes people want to follow them. It's something that, unfortunately, a lot of times you just either have it or you don't. So, what we are going to focus on more is competence and character. So how do you prove that you are competent on a topic? Well, you can demonstrate involvement in the topic. So if I think Lionel Messi is the greatest soccer player of all time. Now, if I'm going to try to persuade my audience that he's the greatest ever, it might be useful for me to say, hey, I've played soccer since I was 4 years old. I played Division I soccer. I had a brother who played in MLS for 3 years, and I currently play semi-professional soccer. Right? I might demonstrate some involvement in the topic. Right? Suddenly the audience is like, okay, this guy knows something about soccer. Right? So maybe I should listen to what he has to say. The second way is to relate your experience. So, speaking on Lionel Messi being the greatest player ever, right? I might talk about the way that he's able to wrap his left footer on the ball and bend it outside of the post and make it come right back in before it goes into the net. Right? I might talk about how I've tried to do that many, many of times from 25 yards out like he does, and I just can't do it. It just seems to be impossible. Right? I might relate my own experience on the topic, right? Part of why Lionel Messi is the greatest player ever. And the last way is to cite research. And if you start citing research, it shows that you've actually done your homework. You've done your research. You know about the topic. And this really leads into character. How do you prove that you are someone of high moral standing? Right? Somebody who ought to be trusted. Well, the first way is to cite your resources accurately and honestly. Right? And don't distort information. Don't cherry pick certain stats. Right? So I don't get up here and say, well, Lionel Messi has scored the most goals ever on Friday nights. Well, we don't really care how many goals he scored on Friday nights. We care about how great he is throughout his entire career. And then show respect for the audience and for other points of view. So if I were to say, well, Lionel Messi is clearly the greatest player in the world, and if you don't think so, you probably don't know anything about soccer. That's not showing respect for other points of view. Some people in your audience may know something about the topic as well. They may believe that Pele or Maradona or Cristiano Ronaldo is the greatest player ever. Right? You're not showing respect for them. Right? So it takes a hit to your character, and suddenly these people don't want to listen to you. What happens when you just suddenly insult somebody? They're going to say, well, I don't want to listen to that guy. Right? Now you're not persuading anybody. You've alienated part of your audience. Pathos, right? So the emotional appeal. Pathos is often one account of something. Right? It's often a story that creates a narrative. So it's important. backtrack a little bit. When we were talking about our informative speeches, I said it was more important to rely on stats, hard data, right, when you're giving an informative speech, because you're simply trying to educate the audience. I think I've mentioned in this class before, research shows that people tend to believe pathos over logos. So people tend to believe, find an emotional appeal a lot more trustworthy than hard statistics and data, which is bizarre to me because I don't operate that way. I don't want one account of something. I want hundreds or thousands of accounts of something, right? It's more reliable that way. Right? For whatever reason, people believe that emotional appeal. So it's important that you have a good amount of pathos in your persuasive speeches, right? But you don't want to over-rely on pathos. Okay? Your pathos needs to be supported by logos. So a good example of this might be if you were, for your topic, you were doing distracted driving, texting and driving, drunk driving, right? Just kind of lumping all that in together as distracted driving. And you were to tell a story about John and how awesome John was. And he worked for a nonprofit and volunteered on the weekends, and in the evenings he was taking care of his sick mother. And on his way to the nursing home to see his mother, he was struck by another car and killed by somebody who was texting and driving. Right? That would be an example of pathos. Right? You're creating this narrative. People who text and drive, right? They crash into other people and kill them. Now, that's pathos. And then leading right into logos. Logos is data and statistics and ensuring your argument is free of logical fallacies. So I might follow that story up with X amount of people every year are killed because someone is texting and driving or driving distracted. So that way my pathos is supported by my logos. If you over-rely on pathos and don't support it with your logos, you'll be guilty of a logical fallacy that we're going to talk about here in a second called hasty generalization. So again, logos, it's about data, it's about statistics, and it's about ensuring your argument is free of logical fallacies. All right, so logical fallacies. I'm not sure why post hoc is showing up that way, but oh well. So, this is a list of the logical fallacies that we're going to go over here shortly. Now, this is not an extensive, exhaustive list. There are other logical fallacies out there that maybe aren't quite as prevalent in society as these ones are. So, the first one is called ad hominem. Could also be called attack on the person. This one is very, very simple. This is where you attack the person rather than their actual argument. So, if basketball, I think Michael Jordan is the greatest player ever. Now, if I was having a debate with somebody, who's the greatest player ever? Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant? And we're having this debate, and all of a sudden I'm like, well, Noah, if you think Kobe Bryant is the greatest player ever, you're just an idiot. You don't know anything about basketball. That would be attacking Noah personally, right? I'm now saying he's an idiot, right? And I'm not actually attacking his argument. So that'd be called ad hominem. The second one is called questionable cause. This is where the speaker asserts evidence that does not actually produce the conclusion that they claim. So if I were to say, John Stockton is the greatest basketball player ever. Why? Because he's the all-time leader in assists for the NBA. He has the most assists ever in the NBA. So he's the greatest player ever. I would likely be guilty of questionable cause. Why? Because when we're talking about the greatest player ever, a lot more goes into it than just being the all-time leader for the NBA in assists. Right? That's part of it, right? Assists, points, rebounds, right? So statistics, your leadership, how good of a leader were you? How many championships did you win, right? There's all these different categories that go into this debate of who's the greatest ever. So simply saying he has the most assists, he's the greatest ever, right? That'd likely be questionable cause. I'm asserting evidence that does not produce the conclusion that I claim. The third one is called opinion as fact, or fact versus opinion. This is a very, very simple logical fallacy. This is simply where you state your opinion as if it is a fact. So if I were to simply say, Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player ever, period, end of story. It's factual. Well, it's not really a fact, right? It's my opinion, right? But it's something that's so subjective that you could make an argument for, right? You can obviously make an argument for Michael Jordan, but you can make an argument for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Larry Bird, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Magic Johnson, right? You can make an argument for so many different people, right? So if I'm simply presenting that as if it is a fact when it is simply my opinion, right? I would be guilty of the logical fallacy, opinion as fact. The next one is called red herring. Red herring is where you insert irrelevant information into an argument, and generally this is done to either distract your opponent or to shift the argument to something new. So if we were arguing, who's a better player, Kobe Bryant or LeBron James? Who had the better career? And then all of a sudden I'm like losing the argument, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, well, Michael Jordan's the greatest ever. Okay, that's not exactly what we were talking about, right? So I'm likely trying to shift the debate. Maybe I'm arguing LeBron's better than Kobe, but I'm losing the argument, right? And suddenly I shift it over to Michael Jordan, right? Because maybe I can, if I have this new argument of Kobe versus Michael Jordan, maybe I can win that argument, right? So that'd likely be a red herring, right? You're inserting information into the argument that is irrelevant to what you're actually arguing, and a lot of times it's done to shift the argument. The next one is called hasty generalization. This is the one I said you would be guilty of if you over-relied on pathos. This would be arguing from a specific example as if it represents the entire population without the data to actually back that up. So, if I were to talk about a specific example where a lady was killed in a car accident and she actually died while she was wearing her seatbelt, and had she not been wearing her seatbelt, she likely would have lived. And I start arguing that it is safer to ride in a car without your seatbelt because of this example. I would likely be guilty of hasty generalization because the data doesn't back that up. That isn't representative of the entire population. That is less than 1% of people, right, that happens to in a car accident. Generally, 99.999% of the time, you are going to be safer with your seatbelt on in a car accident. So that would be hasty generalization. Arguing from one specific example as if it represents the entire population. And you don't have the data to actually back that up. Post hoc. Post hoc is where you assign the wrong cause to the effect. I'm assuming at least most of you have maybe heard the term correlation does not equal causation. That's true. Correlation does not equal causation. So, two things that are positively correlated, right? You can look these up if you'd like. These two things, according to the research, are positively correlated. Once I explain why, you're going to be like, oh, well, of course. So the amount of ice cream cones consumed in a day is actually positively correlated with the amount of swimming deaths in a day. Meaning they both go up and down together. So, if I were to argue, eating ice cream cones is causing people to drown. I would likely be guilty of post hoc. Because there's an underlying cause for both of these things. It's simply being hot outside. When it's hot outside, people like to eat ice cream cones. When it's hot outside, people like to go swimming. The more people that go swimming, the more likely people are to die from swimming, right? They're going to drown. So that would be post hoc, because I'm saying ice cream cones causes people to drown, when in reality, that's not it at all. Right? So assigning the wrong cause to the effect. Now, when it comes to proving causation, you have to isolate the two variables, and that gets rather complicated, right? And that's something for another class that I'm sure you'll take at some point in your college career that I think is a very interesting topic. The next logical fallacy is either-or reasoning. This is very simple, very similar to opinion is fact, right? You can almost tell what the logical fallacy is just by the name. This is where you contend that there are only two options, when in reality, there are more. So, if I were to say, you're either a Republican or a Democrat, one or the other. Well, that's not really true. You could be somewhere in the middle, right? You could not identify as either. You could be a libertarian. There are other options, right? So either-or reasoning, contending there are only two options, when in reality, there are more. Right? So when people say things like, you're either with us or against us, right, they're probably guilty of either-or reasoning. The next logical fallacy is straw man. I really enjoy this one. This is where you set up a false version of your opponent's argument and then attack it. Right? So they're arguing something, and then you kind of miscategorize what they're arguing and how they said it, and then attack that. I've mentioned at the beginning of the semester that I don't really want to put my own political views into this class, because I think it's a shame that college students are rather impressionable. And if their professor says something, they tend to believe it. I think it's important that you guys question your professors. I think it's important that you form your own views, right, before you actually know what your professor's views are. But unfortunately, there are a lot of professors out there who will push their own political agenda on you. So I'm going to give a political example for straw man, right? And I'm going to give it on both sides. So it's rather relevant when it comes to the abortion argument. You have pro-choice and pro-life. Right? And people on the pro-life side say something like, man, people who are pro-choice, they just love killing babies. They get joy out of it. They just love killing babies. They don't care if they kill babies. When in reality, people who are pro-choice, at least a majority of people who are pro-choice, they don't believe it's a baby. They're saying it's a fetus. It doesn't have a life, right? It's not a life yet. Right? So if I were to say that they just love killing babies, when in reality they don't believe that's a baby, I'm miscategorizing their argument. Now this happens on the other side too, because people who are pro-choice, you often hear, oh man, people who are pro-life, they're just attacking women. They just love attacking women. They want them to be our slaves. They want women to be slaves. They shouldn't be able to do what they want with their body. That's what the pro-lifers are saying. That's not true either. Because pro-lifers believe that is a baby. Right? They believe that's a baby. So, they're trying to protect babies. They're not trying to attack women. Right? So, both of those arguments are straw man. Right? They're setting up a false version of the opposing argument and then attacking it. Okay? The next logical fallacy is called slippery slope. This is where you argue that taking a minor action will lead to a more severe action. So an example I can think of is I actually heard a lady say this when gay marriage was becoming federally recognized. She said, man, I can't believe they want to legalize gay marriage. What's next? Are they going to legalize marrying your pets. And that was part of her argument, was they shouldn't legalize gay marriage because next they're going to want to marry their pets. That'd be a slippery slope argument. It'd be arguing that taking a minor action leads to a more severe action. Now, we can talk about the repercussions, right, of a new law, but arguing that a minor action will lead to a more severe action of the same thing isn't really a valid argument. It's called slippery slope. The last one we're going to talk about is appeal to authority. This is where you're generally having a debate with someone or an argument, and you contend that somebody who is either an expert on the topic or somebody who is smarter than both of you agrees with your point of view, so you must be right. Right? So claiming you're correct because someone deemed smarter than you agrees with you. So this happens all the time. This is why it goes right back to why I don't want to share my own political views with my students. I talked earlier in the semester about how who is making the argument is rather irrelevant. You should separate who's making the argument from the actual argument. Examine the argument. And if it's a good argument, it's a good argument. If it's a bad argument, it's a bad argument. But so often we get caught up with what are the credentials of the person making the argument, when those are actually irrelevant. Those are actually irrelevant. If the argument makes sense, it makes sense. Now, things like brain surgery or orthopedic surgery, right? Those are things that I don't even know enough about to even make a valid argument. So obviously you have to have some sort of background in that in order to make an argument about why this is the best way to do a certain surgery or things like that, right? But in general, right, if somehow I knew how to do brain surgery and I didn't have a degree for it, and I could make a valid argument and speak all the lingo, and all these brain surgeons are like, oh my gosh, that makes total sense. Like, we should research that. Right? That would be the right response, as opposed to being like, well, this guy doesn't have a degree, so why should we listen to him? Well, no, you should look at his argument. Because if somebody who had a degree made that argument, and you would have listened to them, right, or at least researched their topic, you should probably listen to this guy the same way and research the topic. So, appeal to authority happens all the time in our country. So a couple questions that you guys should consider when organizing your speech. The first one is, should you present both sides? Again, persuasive speech is you must choose a topic that has more than one side. Right? So should you present both sides? That's a question for you guys. You guys need to look at your own speech, right? Your own topic, right? See if you can actually present both sides, right? So a couple things to consider when asking that question. A, do you have enough time to actually present both sides? So 4 to 7 minutes, that's the time constraints for this speech. And I'll get in when we're finished here about how we're actually going to deliver those speeches. But anyways, so do you actually have enough time to present both sides? That's the first question to ask. And the second is, can you actually set up the opposing side and knock it down fairly easily without committing straw man? Can you actually accurately represent the other side and poke holes in the argument? If the answer is yes to both those things, then you should present both sides. If the answer is no to either one of those things, you probably should not present both sides. The next question you should ask is, when should you present your strongest argument? Now, this is one that I don't necessarily think is super unique to each person. The primacy and recency effect, right? People tend to remember the first piece of information they're shown on a topic and the last piece of information that they're shown on a topic. So, where should you present your strongest argument? You must have 3 main points, either in the first main point or the last main point. People are more likely to remember those. I'm a fan of saving your strongest argument for last. But You could absolutely put your strongest argument at the beginning. My advice is put your weakest argument in the middle. People are more likely to forget it. Now, ideally, you don't have a weak argument. Ideally, they're all strong arguments. Right? So put your strongest at the end and your second strongest at the beginning, or vice versa. The last piece of material I want to go over is Monroe's motivated sequence pattern. This is a means of persuasion. So Monroe contended that you need these things in order to persuade people. And the first is their attention. Okay? That's why we have an attention getter for our speeches. And generally in every English class you'll take, they'll talk about why you need an attention getter when you're writing a paper. Right? If you don't have people's attention, they're not actually going to hear what you have to say. Right? So the first thing you need is their attention. Number 2 is a need. Right? You need some sort of need. So, going back to the eating healthy argument, right? The need might be, you need to feel better. You need to live longer. Then satisfaction to that need. So how are you going to feel better and live longer? Well, the solution to the need might be eating healthier. Right? If you eat healthier, right, you're going to have more energy, you're going to live longer, you're going to feel better. Right? There's the satisfaction or solution to the need. The next step is visualization. Right? So this is painting a detailed picture of what the solution actually looks like. So visualization might look like eating more vegetables, eating more fruits, eating more lean meats, right? That'd be the visualization. Right? You're detailing the solution. This is what breakfast would look like. This is what lunch would look like. This is what dinner would look like. This is what your snacks would look like. This is what you would look like. Right? So that's visualization. And the last step is action. Right? You need to ask the audience to commit to carrying out the solution. So you'll notice when you take a look at the rubric for our persuasive speech, which again is due Friday, April 17th, right? So we still have a little bit. One of the components of the rubric that I put on there is left the audience with a call to action. So this should be the last thing you do in your persuasive speech. You're going to ask the audience to commit to carrying out the solution. And this call to action, ideally, should line up with one of the 4 goals of persuasion, right? Adoption, discontinuance, deterrence, or continuance. Right? So my call to action should look like start eating more vegetables, right? Or stop eating Big Macs, or don't start eating at McDonald's, or eat more lean meats than you already do. Right? That's that call to action. You're asking them to commit to doing something. And ideally, you want them to commit to doing it soon, right? So eat more vegetables today. Stop eating at McDonald's today. That's that call to action. So make sure you have a call to action for your speech. Okay? So that is all I have for persuasive speaking. If you guys have any questions about persuasive speaking, right? What your persuasive speeches should look like, feel free to reach out to me. Again, our persuasive speeches will be due Friday, April 17th. Given the fact that the government is recommending quarantine and social distancing, you guys don't need an audience for this speech. You can present directly to a camera, and then you will have to get that video to me in some way. The way I would prefer is through YouTube. I will post instructions on how to upload a video to YouTube, right? So then you can just send me the link, right? So that way you guys have a clear picture of how to get your video to me. If you choose to go a different route, send it to me some different way, that's totally fine. Just ensure that I can actually view the video. So I'll have instructions posted on how to get your speeches posted on YouTube next week. So again, what is due for this week? You have the presidential debate logical fallacy assignment, and then you have journal 4. And those are under different tabs, right? One is under the chapter 12 tab on Talon, and the other one is under the journal tab on Talon. So get those in by Friday. Have a great rest of your week, guys.